Hey everyone, Dr. Luke Peterson here, physical therapist with the Knee Replacement Therapist. In this episode of the Need to Know Show, I'm going to talk about hip hinging and show you 2 simple ways to practice hip hinge technique using a dowel or a broomstick handle. Hi everyone, Dr. Luke Peterson here, physical therapist. So hip hinging is a very important and often discussed movement pattern. So basically what hip hinging is, it's the movement that you do with your hips when performing a movement, such as a deadlift, such as with a squat, such as standing up from a chair, anything where you're moving your body in this up and down vertical type of motion. You want to utilize a hip hinge technique in most circumstances for a variety of reasons. And the main reason is with a good hip hinge technique, what you're doing is you're allowing the movement to come from the strength in your glutes and in your hips while trying to limit the amount of excessive strain on the muscles of your low back in particular. So certain movements, a lot of times people, when you stand to do something, you go down. We want to try to limit the amount of this trunk flexion posture. For example, if you're picking up a box, something like that. Although your body is very strong and durable and can tolerate that, we want to focus more on a hip hinge technique that allows you to take advantage of good biomechanics. So a hip hinge technique will keep a more neutral posture of your back while taking some of that stress off of the low back as well. So what you do with a hip hinge is you're hinging, just like it says, you hinge at your hip joint. So instead of flexing your trunk and everything like this, you're actually keeping your trunk in this good kind of neutral position, and then you're hinging at your hips. So your hips are like a door hinge, like this. And what you'll notice as well is as you hinge, as you bend at your hips, you're also bringing your hips posterior or backward. So you hinge and then bring the hips posterior, keeping your back in as much as a neutral position as we can. There's going to be a little bit of flexion just in normal physiology and movement, but trying to keep that neutral position of the hips. And as you get very good at this, you'll notice that you'll be able to carry over this movement with all sorts of both exercises, deadlifts, single leg deadlifts, squats, things like that, but also with functional movements, standing up from a chair, picking something up off the ground, all sorts of different things. So 2 easy ways to practice the hip hinge movement. So right now I have a broomstick. I took the brush off the end of it, but you can use a broomstick, you can use a dowel if you have one, you can use a golf club, a baseball bat can work if you're piece of tubing or a piece of pipe, whatever it might be, PVC pipe, whatever you might have available. So the first strategy is you actually hold the dowel or hold the broomstick in front of you like this, and you're going to use this as kind of a cue to push your hips backward and to both hinge at that hip joint. So you're kind of pushing into your hips right at that crease a little bit. So as you come down, so the hands, my hands, typically I have the elbows bent a little bit. If you're someone who does weight training, doing things like hanging cleans, things like that, you want the arms straight. But this one, you're just a little bit of bend just so you get right in that crease of the hips. And as you bend your knees and bend your hips, you're going to put a little bit of push, bring the hips posterior, backward, and you're going to hinge. And you're going to just practice that in a controlled manner. As you get better, you can go a little bit further and further. Remember, you don't want this. Don't want that flexion of your trunk. You want your back up nice and straight. Sometimes a little bit of that hyperextension, that curve in the back. It's not the end of the world, but you want to try to keep relatively neutral posture as best you can. So that's one way to practice that hip hinge technique, having that cue pushing into your hips, pushing backward. Another way to do it is you put the stick behind your back and you hold, one hand is going to be up. I'm going to kneel just so you can see it. So one hand is up in the crease of your neck, and then one hand is going to be down in the small of your back. And we talk about having 3 contact points. So one is the back of your head, or you're kind of right at that point of your head. The second one is between your 2 shoulder blades, and then right on your bottom there. So you're holding it up like this, and you can do this standing. I'm just doing it kneeling to show you. And you want to maintain your hand position and those 3 points of contact on the stick. And you're just going to hinge down and then back up. And you'll start to notice some limitations in your mobility. You'll start to notice that you probably can't go as far because you'll start to compensate, you'll start to lose those contact points, but it's a really good way to practice in a slow and controlled manner doing that hip hinge movement up and down. And again, not everyone's a big weightlifter or anything like that. You don't need an excessive amount of range of motion. You don't have to be able to bend all the way down to the ground necessarily, but if you think about standing up from a chair, you think about bending down to grab something. See, I started to lose it there. All sorts of different functional activities and movements. And then if you get very good at this, you can start to add weight, start to add some resistance, build up some strength into your legs and everywhere else. So that's an overview of the hip hinge movement and 2 relatively easy exercises that you can practice with using a broomstick or a dowel or something you have at home that's similar. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Please subscribe, leave your comments and questions. I love to respond to people and interact with everyone, and have a great rest of your day.